What do you mean she was introduced to drugs by her pastor?
You had the real worker bees, like the woman I profiled who was working in a bank and got introduced to drugs by her pastor.
Excuse me?
She is a religious person, but was competing for one of two spots in a bank and doing the extra assignments besides her master's.
How is a pastor, a shepherd of the flock, giving someone who is struggling with their ambitions in life, not the word of God, but the very best of Colombian white? There's a story about a young man, maybe 30 years of age, Sally, who went into a nursery school and just started murdering children. I wonder if there is a certain correlation between what happened to Susan Magara.
Susan was kidnapped for ransom. And the story dominated Ugandan headlines. They cut off her fingers and sent them to the parents. The president of Uganda, President Museveni, got involved.
Is this the devil at play?
This is the very, very best. I introduce the very, very next. Big deal. You know this is the big league. Sanga mumi handa ya chigari miga big fish. Word on the street to Akagera. Habari gani mumeze mte. Yute chimi mana kuva honda muchiye. If you want the long form, come close mrabule. Wait, what?
The long form.
What did he say?
The long form.
What?
The long form.
The long form. The long form. This conversation is brought to you by Akagera Medicines, a biotech company that is majority owned by the Rwandan people. Akagera Medicines is not only committed to expanding access to healthcare, but also supporting conversations that inform, educate, and empower. Learn more about Akagera Medicines by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting their website at akageramedicines.com. Uganda is often described as a country of opportunity, but for many people, unfortunately, that is not how it feels. Because alongside ambition, there is pressure, rising costs, limited opportunities, and a growing skepticism about whether the system is actually working. My guest on the Longform podcast today is Angelo Izama. Angelo is a Ugandan journalist, writer, and analyst whose work has focused on political economy, security, and how decisions are made in Uganda and across the region. He's a former Knight Fellow at Stanford and the co-founder of Fanaka kwa Wote, a think tank that studies governance, human security, and policy in East Africa. So today's conversation moves across a few difficult areas: the mood of the country, especially among young people, the ways people respond when pressure starts to build, the gaps between national ambition and public trust, and how economic shocks, political decisions, and long-term strategy shape what comes next. Because to understand where a country is going, you first have to understand what it feels like to live inside it today. Angelo, welcome to the Longform podcast.
Thank you for having me.
In beautiful Kampala.
Beautiful Uganda.
Amen. I'm into that.
Yeah.
Let me ask you what I call a dumb question, but I think it will kind of place this conversation in that context. If you had to describe it honestly, what does it feel to be Ugandan today?
It's not a dumb question at all. It's a very difficult question. Yeah. So Uganda is very, very many things. And you mentioned that, and my mind just went to Mao Zedong and his maxim, "Let 1,000 flowers bloom." I know we are just shy of 50 million people, but Uganda packs into that number first the most acute rendering of Africa's generational position today.
What do you mean?
I now, at my age, are just part of the 14%.
You're 51.
Yes. But, not just 51. Just, I think in another 10 years, I will be almost in the 10 percentile of Ugandans of my age. Compare that to, say, Japan and much of Europe and America. Africa is young and poor, mostly, and full of promise. And because the median age in Uganda is 15 years or about there, in that demographic, there you have, what Africa's future really looks like. So to be Ugandan, to answer your question, today is to face this sort of part frightening, part hopeful prospect that the seeds of Africa's future are planted firmly in this soil.
Off camera, you and I, we've known each other, and I think that's the beauty of the internet, is that because of all these interactions on X, or Twitter as it was known, you hear someone's thoughts on various topics. You read their writings, again, because of the power of the internet and your blog posts. So I feel like I've always known you. But literally today was the very first time that we actually met face to face. And we were talking about elites and how who's an elite, who's not an elite. How do those two groups, I guess, deal with each other? What do Ugandans of a particular age, let's say your age, how they define how it is to be successful and to be worthy of respect versus, say, someone who's maybe 35, 32. You said a few things that were quite profound, and it got me thinking about this generational challenge, right? You talked about Uganda being super young.
It's very super young.
Super young. But it's largely led by people who are, I will not call them super old, but of an older generation.
You could call them super
they're
old.
Seasoned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a qualitative. And if they're watching your show, and many of them I'm sure do, you're being polite. Yeah. I think that they will be honest because many of them, they grew up in, so what the cards that the world dealt them at the time were very different. The generation of leaders today we have came out of their teenage years after the Second World War had changed the world. And then they were led by dreamers like Nkrumah and even Obote and Nyerere. And these dreamers were now in charge of so-called independent states. And the young people wanted more. So they entered a period of real strife, But because, of those experiments in their dreams, you had a wartime generation, especially here in Uganda, that for 25 years after independence was just preoccupied with fighting. And that dream got deferred. And then the other 10, 15 years after that, they had to deal with, brutal social changes, pandemics, HIV. Then now the end of the World War and the liberation was replaced by the post-liberal world order. They had to deal with all kinds of new social changes and economic realities. And all of these things is to say that, I'm just being kind to that generation, is that, when we think about them empathetically, they have carried their share of that burden of the African story. The super young people today, I feel, carry even a bigger burden, because the economic pressures are even persistent and much more deleterious. The social pressures, as you've seen from the culture wars, are much more acute. That generation of what we now consider burner phones, because that was a big technology at the time. Now I have to watch while the younger people are dealing with, this aging internet and now artificial intelligence. So you see, I feel if you take every generation on its own account, so these so-called young elites are carrying their own very, very different share of that burden. And I want to say that it's as much as the older generation, as you know the phrase, each generation has its own burden. So I feel that, if you separate that, if you divide that burden, it is equally heavy on this current generation. In many cases, I feel heavier because there are many more of them. That's a different reality now. The resources to be shared
less and less.
Are less and less. So they have to think about how to do that. And the culture is much more, confusing to navigate.
Talk about the culture. There's something you said, that young people now want everything big. Big cars, big house. The last one, it was
big-bodied women. Because every time I go online, sometimes I see the Nyash Tuesdays or something like that. I actually cited an article which I didn't complete.
About Nyash?
It is about the culture. The article was titled, "What is in an IV?" And it was because I encountered one of my younger friends who had asked me, okay, I'm coming to do a treatment here in Ntinda, which is nearby where I'm recording this.
Yes.
For the glow. I said, what do you mean? I said, it's meant for skin glow.
What do you mean?
If you look, the aesthetic that sort of personifies the young person today is all exhibitionist, I know in the 60s, we are all consumers of the culture. So the big platform shoes and the colorful kente and all those things. And Fela Kuti, and every generation has a big pockets of this. But today, there is, you have to express yourself amongst others in how good your skin looks. So anyway, the IV is basically a vitamin C infusion by IV into your body. It takes about an hour and a half, and it's supposed to create this glow on your skin that can last you 2-3 days. And I asked myself, why?
I mean, that's the question. Why?
Part of this is that consumerist, exhibitionist culture, and this is a good point, Sunny, because I feel that one of the things that the generation before us had, including ours, was that the absence of technology meant that we could talk to each other, and you had word of mouth, and the social systems were much more ever present. You had to interact with them physically. Today, the culture is such that you can curate your life, okay, without anyone present. It's all done online. And these online currents have so become mainstream that, you could, make something of drinking that glass of water, can become viral. It can go from here to South Korea,
Yeah.
and carry on a life of its own. So the skin glow is one of those things that have come, and it's part of the zeitgeist. It's part of who these young people are. I also did this. I came to this article by just going and observing. So I went to a place in one of the town centers here, and the whole floor was full of beauty technicians, manicurists, pedicurists, hair salons, Then you have got this IV business. So, individuals today and how they present themselves, but not just to the people they interact with, but present themselves online, has become part of that, culture. And it's not just, global, many of it is local.
It's something that's, now that you brought it up, a few episodes back, I had a financial expert discuss with me how do young people get ahead. And one of the things that he said, he referenced the average salary of a 25-year-old university graduate in either Kigali or Kampala. They're earning about between $200 to about $500 if they get a job. Now, my social media team clipped that and sent it out into the ether. Till today, I'm getting, comments on it, and the overwhelming sentiment is those statistics are lies.
Mm-hmm.
We barely get $100 a month.
If you're lucky.
To now bring it back to what you're talking about.
It's still about the elite.
Yes.
Okay.
Who's paying for those treatments? Because those treatments, when I wanted vitamin C, I'd eat an orange. Treatment done.
Mm-hmm. and eat an orange, other fruits consistently over time, you're okay.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, you're in beautiful Uganda. Fruits are not your problem.
No, they're not.
This is not Sweden.
Yeah.
Why are we seeing this? You've kind of defined that, which is, it's a look at me kind of world that we're living in. But in our contexts, all those treatments are more likely to be expensive, over $100, over $200. Who's paying for this? And is it the young women or the young men? Because I don't want to assume that it's only women doing this. And what does this mean? Listen, I know just how annoying it is when, just in the middle of a really interesting conversation on YouTube, an ad appears. That frustration is why we've created the long-form Patreon. For just $4 a month, you can enjoy ad-free listening, early access to conversations a full day before they're publicly released, and you're directly supporting the work that we do here. Every episode takes time, research, and sometimes plane tickets. We don't do it for money. We do it because we genuinely believe in sharing stories and conversations that matter. If you want to be part of that journey, you can join the long-form Patreon by scanning the QR code that you can see right now on the screen, or using the link in the description. And if membership is too much of an investment, you can still support us by making a one-time donation via our MTN Momo using the code registered under LF Media 95462. Thank you so much for believing in what we do. Here's a question. What are your secrets worth? And how far will you go to protect them? Every day, tens of thousands of hacked credentials for emails, social media, and other services are bought and sold on the dark web, all without victims suspecting a thing. If you're like me and desire some peace of mind, Threat Informant is for you. Built by Shield Tech Hub, a cybersecurity company, Threat Informant is a dark web monitoring online solution that allows you to search the deep web for hidden markets, detect your leaked data, and react before any damage is done. And here is the best part. It's available for government agencies, businesses, and individuals like myself. It's simple. If your data is out there, Threat Informant will let you know. So take control of your digital safety today and scan the QR code that you can see on your screen, or click the link in the description to sign yourself and your entire organization up. You cannot protect yourself if you don't know you're under threat. Get Threat Informant today.
Okay. So this is the bigger story about the lost opportunity. It's a story about waste. Okay, and we can get to that. And the way I wanted to describe this is the billboard culture. Look at me. Okay, is only in response to the fact that people are no longer alive in their communities the way they used to be. I was hanging out with young friends, and we were at a bar, and the young lady said, to her husband, I am leading my cell, which is a Pentecostal thing. I can't make it. And he's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. Ask someone else to do, and we'll do it online, So she went aside and, went online. Yeah. And now, little religious services are also streamed. I'm telling you this because, back in the day, where you met community was you had the market, you had the church, you had the school, you had the compounds. Okay? Today, a lot of that is displaced. And you could use the word misplaced. We can get to that later. Displaced means that now you do not have the forms of interaction that allow you to organize better. The story of waste in Uganda, some people talk about it as corruption, okay?
Mm.
If you look at the massive pilfering of the public purse, that money goes somewhere, okay?
It trickle-down economics.
Mm-hmm. Not only does it go somewhere, it is tailored along a social path, whereby if I steal 1 billion shillings, okay, where am I going to spend it? Recently, we would, I may take someone to Dubai or Seychelles or Mauritius or South Africa, okay, but that's just a portion. So I buy expensive phones, I spend some time in the spa and the bar. I'm just describing a typical, I may spend some of that on drugs, okay? It's a consumerist culture, but it's a spending culture, and it's a spending culture on waste. Now, if you think about the person who had magendo money during their many years, it is still a form of corruption.
So for those who don't understand Kiswahili, magendo is smuggling.
Yeah. If you think about those mafuta mingi people, they would take that money, right? Buy a piece of land, buy a truck, and they're the reason why we have a lot of the enterprises we have today, right? Today it's different because you don't have these forms of culture or of organization. The heroes of our consumerist culture are those who can spend on Bentleys, on Mercedes-Benzes, and have, people around them that emphasize that living large, And it's not just in Uganda, by the way. You can see it in West Africa.
It's the same in Kigali. It's a large conversation.
So
that
the
we're
waste,
having.
because I want to come down to the waste. The waste is part of that misplacement. Because, the money and the opportunities that money could pursue are displaced, you've got this group of people who are really misplaced. They are misplaced because if they had organized better, if they were in a social system that, gave them different, and you mentioned it earlier, different cues of what respect looks like, of what excellence is about, okay? Then we wouldn't have, some of the problems we are having today. In my world, if I had to live another lifetime, which I won't, of course, if there was a problem that I would solve as a citizen, would be the housing problem. Housing planning, just giving people a sense of good shelter, okay? Communal shelter, where you can have a house, it's designed in a way that you can know your neighbor, that you have got schools that approximate, playgrounds, etc., etc. I know that the money is here, and I'm telling you this because I actually was, at one time I held a directorship in a state institution, the Investment Authority of Uganda. And looking at this question of housing shortages and the opportunities to do better planning, I could now see in retrospect that it's all about that waste, all about that displacement, because the wealth is there, okay? Those young people, for example, even with a $300 dollar income, okay? Their peers in the rest of the world would walk out of school, maybe borrow money from their family, meet someone they like, foreclose on a mortgage, okay? And spend the next 25 years building equity in a property that is well situated. They may refinance that mortgage. I tell this story all the time, to take a holiday somewhere, to do something else with their lives. And that is all a question of organization. Now, I know we have come full circle because we were saying earlier, let's be empathetic to the burdens that the last 2 generations and ours have borne, okay? There is a reason why we are in this place where we see massive opportunity, and yet we also see massive waste, and we see massive displacement, And it is part of our material and spiritual sickness that we are living in an era where there is so much technological innovation, so much wealth, but unequally distributed across the world, okay? So much hope because we are living with a very young population, and yet we see so much desperation because we're not organized.
The conversation around the plight of young people really touches my heart because I see them, and all I can think about is the fact that life will be super hard for them. Whether I tell a story, when I just got married a decade ago, and I wanted to buy a piece of land in the village. By the way,
congratulations to that we are seeing now that marriages that last beyond a decade, in terms of the percentage of overall marriages, are reducing.
But I mean, listen, I had an okay job, but I wouldn't say I was the wealthiest, but I was able to buy a small farm, and I said, you know what, I want to buy a small farm. I want to do this because I was trying to mirror what my father's generation had been able to do. And then I got a couple of years down the line, I got a mortgage. Now we have a little house, the home that we call our own. And I talk to young people back home in Kigali, and I look at them and say, I don't know how you'll be able to enjoy the blessings that I had. Affordable housing, cheap farmland. Is that something that you see here, and is that what you think is fundamentally driving the challenges that you're describing about, waste? And are they saying, I'll never buy that piece of land, therefore let me buy this Mercedes-Benz?
In some ways, I'm the wrong example, because if I am to be utterly honest, I don't own any property. And
Explain that as an Amin generation child.
Mhm.
How do you not have
This is part
a
of that.
piece
Yeah,
of
that-
Uganda?
This is
Call your
part
own.
of that. I could say side effects of the kind of intellectual journey I have taken.
Mm.
And I would say it is just unique to me.
Mm.
When I meet people, I tell them, I don't own property. I have been traveling. I do have a family. My wife is a college professor, and we, have a residence outside of Uganda, residency. But I remember having this conversation with her at some point when the Ugandan dream is, today you can define it for a generation above 40, even the ones who are 35. It is the plot of land where you spend 10, 15 years building a house.
With no mortgage, no debt.
No mortgage, no debt. And in that period, you're raising a family, so you've got the plot of land, school fees. Now we have extended school fees to the second degree or third degree that both you and your partner are going to take, because our sense is the more papers, the more secure you are. That is the curse of my generation, because it is so consuming that you meet a 50-year-old today and they're done. They have gone through that burn. The kids, if they started early, are now teenagers. Some of them may be leaving the house. But you've got the house, which is the dead asset. You're debt free, but if you look much, if you value it in market terms, if one of them falls sick, and you had to dispose of an asset, okay, it would likely be the house, and then things are. That is the reality for a generation ahead. The economic system that we really deserve is the one that you described, where instead of waste, okay, you conserve and you build equity. We don't have an active mortgage market here. And I kid you not, if you look at property prices on this hill, okay, you compare them with property prices at some luxury piece of real estate at the coast of Africa, it's more expensive to stay here. So there's so much waste, but also the political insurance system yet has not produced a vision, okay, that can allow the young people both here and maybe in Kigali to say, my actual path is going to be, I live, thank God I've been educated by my parents, okay, or I'm educating myself. When I get a job, I'm able to take my money, okay, and instead of spend it out of pocket, like my generation has done, which is like buy bricks and buy cement, okay, I may pay Sunny's company, okay, to get a home I can own, or now I can rent to own. That's also possible now. And that while I build equity, that equity is stable over time, okay, and can be transferred so that that asset actually rises in value. There are modern ways which you don't need to reinvent. But like I said, we are going through this period of relative decadence, okay? And I use that word painfully because it means that we have taken several steps forward as far as our political liberation is concerned, and several steps backward as far as social amity, social progress is concerned. And this is just the way history works. There may come a time, maybe when your sons are my age, when this is not a problem, where it is quite clear that, the social and economic system is organized to reduce waste, to prioritize growth, okay, and to build together the kinds of things that we all say we want, but we're now no longer trying to get it individually. There are mansions in this city of ours that would put, some people to shame, guys. I'll tell you the story. I went to catch drinks with good friends of mine. They're younger, and one is a techie. The other one is an engineer, but an entrepreneur. They have a company, and they showed me one of their side gigs, which is building home cinemas. I've never heard of someone, I've seen it in the movies, and I've traveled, okay? But Ugandans are like luxury home cinemas that are family-sized, 4 or 5 seats, and they're now building bigger home cinemas. You see what I'm saying? Eh? There is a sense of there's a sense there that you can achieve individually but not collectively, and in between there's just so much waste.
We talk a lot about globalization, technology, and scale, but none of it works if people do not feel understood. Language is trust. Language is access. And that's exactly why I want to tell you more about African languages experts. If you're expanding into African markets, running research studies, or building AI products that rely on high-quality language data, these are the people you call. They handle everything from translation, linguistic validation, transcription, and subtitling to voice data collection, data annotation, content moderation, and clinical localization. But what really stands out is the quality. They understand that language isn't just words, it's culture, context, nuance. And in a world where AI is moving fast, that human expertise matters more than ever. So if your work touches Africa, African languages, or African audiences in any way, check out African Languages Experts. You can scan the QR code on your screen or check out the link in the description.
Talking about decadence, there's a piece of writing I saw that you did a few years ago about Kampala's drug scene. In that piece of writing, you described
It is
something.
a 3-part series.
Yes, yeah. I only saw the 2.
The 3-part series.
The third one I haven't had a chance to read. You described something striking for me. You described drug dealers operating almost like a service economy, helping people cope, stay functional, and escape pressure. That suggests something much deeper. It's not just decadence. It's something more insidious. What, in your researching of those articles, what did that make you understand about the experience of young people and younger people in Kampala and their need to be able to survive and just function as citizens?
Yeah. The story about that, it took a couple of years, but I want to credit a young girl called Pamela Kangwaji. And I
Tell me
haven't seen
about her.
Huh?
Tell me about her.
She, when I was working at the Monitor, her mom used to run the staff restaurant. And I met her, and then it turns out that we had common friends. And then years later, she partnered with someone I grew up with, and then both of them were dealing with, now they have said it publicly, with the serious substance issues. And now he runs a Serenity Center. I think she does something similar. But I was a political journalist. My bread and butter was slaying the big stories. You know, I was going after political corruption. I dabbled doing national security stories. And, you know, I came from a very, very like small group of journalists in the newsroom who took risks.
What politics were you doing that were so dangerous?
You know, I was a producer for a program called Andrew Mwenda Live. And we got into all kinds of trouble. But it was the sharp tip of the spear of Ugandan journalism. And, you know, in a sense, very fearless. You know, now when you think back at, you know, in retrospect, the stakes, statecraft, you know, you're from Rwanda, but, you know, we were, I was a journalist when Uganda was prosecuting a war in the north. It was the situation with the SPLA, you know, these liberation movements are going around. And, you know, you take 2 steps away from your generation. And now when you think about it, the guys who are balancing the scales were dealing with some pretty serious odds. But, you know, they had to deal with journalists who were wondering about these strategies, dealing with the huge losses that came in terms of human beings, lives lost, and, you know, treasure lost. And these are the things we are dealing with. But this is a story about the drug story. So one time I was at a club or pub, and then I met Pamela, who chastised me. He says, you know, Angelo, you claim to speak for young people and the problems of, you know, Uganda. This is my preoccupation. You know, is doing this analysis and presenting them in whatever platforms are accessible to me. I said, but you know, I can tell you that there are young people who are so desperate, they will come to the city and will have no money to eat or whatever, but they need money for drugs. She explained to me how, you know, this thing was not just creeping, but it was the reality for a lot of people who, when they came and they show up at the pub, they really just want something to get by. And drugs, even the excessive alcoholism, was consuming them. And they were responding to this sense of hopelessness. And the hopelessness was because, you know, life was getting increasingly difficult. You couldn't get a job, hold a job. Anyway, she said, no, look, you know, don't pay too much attention to these political shenanigans and other things. Try and focus also on the social problems that are right here beneath. You know, just you can see, you don't know them, but they're there. And then it allowed me to, you know, to start focusing. You know, journalism is all about observation. And I had an exercise I did in the newsroom where even when I took a complex political story, okay, say, you know, why isn't this generation of Ugandan leaders able to build wide roads when the Karakas of Uganda could do so? You know, I would get out of the newsroom and I would walk around and I would look at ordinary people and I ask myself, it's also sort of meditation. Is what you're going to write able to express what these people would like it to say? And I would go back and then I would complete my writing. So I'd gone through this process, you know, with Pamela, and I kept in the back of my head. But just before COVID, I had decided to pivot away from the hard economic and political life to much more social things. And I confronted the drug issue again. But again, as a journalist, I try not to bring, you may have seen that series, a moral judgment to it. I try to see it the way
It is.
it is. And you find, and this is the reality, that privileged kids, I profile there, educated abroad, come back to Uganda, confront this inertia, retreat to a life of drug taking, okay? Because they are bored and they just don't get a sense that, his friend is in Hong Kong doing some crazy stuff, and he's here where his privileges keep him under comfort, but it's not the world that he wants. So there are many suicides, nasty stuff for those who are privileged. Then you had the real worker bees, like the woman I profiled who was working in a bank and got introduced to drugs by her pastor.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
So I will not allow you just to pass that so quickly. What do you mean she was introduced to drugs by her pastor?
So she is a religious person.
Yes.
Spends a lot of time in the prayer circle, but was competing for one of two spots in a bank. That meant being the first person in,
Last one out,
and doing the extra assignments besides her master's she was studying, And all of this, of course, is enveloped by her religious worldview, which is, this sort of Pentecostal materialist thing that, if you work hard.
And if you pray, God will give you.
God will give you. And the pastor, I think in an attempt to help her keep alive, burning the candle on all sides, introduced her to cocaine.
Okay.
So cocaine was what she was using.
I'm hearing what you're saying, but my brain, my neurons in my brain are just the connection is not working.
Okay.
And this is in Uganda. So maybe this might be maybe we might have to veer into a conversation about Christianity and how it's practiced in certain parts of Uganda, because I would think the one person who would not give you cocaine, I was thinking that maybe this pastor would give the young lady Adderall, which is at least a pharmaceutical drug that will allow you to, or amphetamine, which is also not great, but cocaine from quote unquote brother Joshua.
If I had the time to spend, I would get into that whole spiritual materialist culture. But I was one of those who objected very early to the wealth gospel. And I remember where exactly I was, but I'm just saying this because, I grew up with people who then became pastors.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. This is the most ridiculous thing. I've heard ridiculous.
But you're dealing, Sonny, with the contradictions, right? And I wanted to tell you that the contradictions are part of that waste.
How is a pastor, a shepherd of the flock,
a personal spiritual guidance,
giving someone who is struggling with their ambitions in life, not the word of God, but the very best of Colombian white? That is the craziest thing.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, go on, but no.
But okay, like I said, I'm just selling it as it is. And she, by the way, got the job, which is great. Okay. But that whole...
There's Red Bull.
Yeah.
There's so many things that the
that
pastor
whole
could have...
thing actually led to a dependency that was not great. The dependency was both for her and her spiritual guide, that pastor, and the dependency on the drug. Because, if you remember in the series, the drugs were an expression of class and access. So at the top you had cocaine, at the bottom you had dirty marijuana, and some really, combinations of that.
Of all sorts
A
of
very,
things.
very, very dangerous alchemy of, crude cocaine, crude heroin, and marijuana that was killing a lot of kids.
Was the lady able to tell you the name of the pastor? I'm just asking. I might not ask you to reveal the name.
Yeah, I know the person.
Okay. Is he still practicing?
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, he is.
Have you ever had a conversation with him?
No. I kind of
Is he well known?
Stopped. He's well known. I kind of stopped dealing directly with people in this world. I'll tell you why. When I first, my first encounter with the drugs as they are was from a security point of view. Like I said, I'm a journalist. I was dealing with big picture things. So I could tell you, like I was part of a study with the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa, where the lead researcher, and I quote that study in that series, said, of the 40 to 50 tons of heroin that passed through the East African coast, 8 to 10 tons were now remaining for local consumption. And this is like 10 years ago, It's 10, 15 years ago. It's a well-established route for drugs originating largely in Afghanistan and Pakistan and coming down the coast. And I remember being a trainer to police officers in Seychelles with a group. Senior police officers were there, and when I arrived in Mahe Island, I immediately realized they had a drug problem. On the way between the short distance between at the airport and where we were staying, I was able to talk to, and eventually I spoke to the police officer who was in my class about the problems of drugs in Seychelles. That's a small population. They're literally like just shy of 100,000, and a massive drug problem. All that drugs are, flowing in the Indian Ocean. There are colonies in Tanzania now of people who are dependent on state care because of the drug addiction, and Mombasa and others. In Kampala, we have seen this present itself as an overwhelming pressure on the mental health institutions that are here, which are not built to deal with substance abuse. And now there's a whole private ecosystem, but families and society at large, I feel, have not really confronted this issue honestly.
I mean, if the pastors are giving out the drugs.
And, take my experience example.
It's probably also the headmasters as well, and the police officers.
Schools, yeah. Of course, that economy I describe in the series. And during COVID, because I completed that series around the time, I realized just how ingenious. This is a funny thing about a double-edged sword, right? Your drugs, they have a bad effect. But the people who are the enterprise managers really displayed some ingenuity that I looking from the outside in, I'm
and
like,
customer service.
Great customer service. You could sit somewhere in a spa, in a restaurant, in your home, and just order it the way you order,
a hamburger.
Yeah, a hamburger. And I was like, this is like next generation, right? And I also talk to people who are like,
And this is during COVID when, if I'm not mistaken, here, Kampala had a hard lockdown.
Yeah. And remember, it separated dealers from their customers.
Mhm.
So they had to find ways to keep people, and the people had more need because COVID was mind-bending isolation.
Mm.
So people relied a lot on this sort of things. In that series, I describe how this young lady had been separated from her dealer, who used to send stuff via the border, realized the border guy now was an entrepreneur as well. And he came by and said, but you haven't really ordered in a while. And she says, yeah, money. He says, no, it's okay. Take this for free, okay? And gives us some sample. And come when you're ready. Of course, this is like, one-on-one marketing, right? Samples, delivered to your doorstep at no cost.
Convenience.
Convenience. Yeah. This is the whole story about waste I was referring to, waste and displacement, the terms I want to use, because that sheer talent could go into a different direction. And the sense of desperation is really the inverse of a sense of hope, because desperate people just simply are dealing with what they see as a bad situation, but they want it to get out of it. And if you flip it, it is just the kind of hope that drives change. And you look at societies that have gone through massive social trauma, they always get to a point where that desperation is converted by leaders with vision into a pathway for hope and progress. And this, I'm hoping, is what would happen, in here at some point. But without crisis, there won't be change.
But what you've told me is that there's crisis. Why are we not seeing change? If when you think about social ills like corruption, you're thinking it's usually government and people in government are stealing. But what you've described is societal.
Yeah.
Right? Very often when we talk about state building and government and change of government and transitions, we're always thinking all the problems will just be solved by new leadership. Paul Kagame can leave tomorrow. The challenges that Rwanda faces at a societal level will remain, and we have to deal with them. If Museveni was to leave tomorrow, what you've just described is, I laughed because it's a level of rot that even I can't. I thought I'd heard it all. You just, you blew my mind. And then I think, how do we get out of that? If that's what has been normalized, if a pastor is giving his flock drugs, not because he's even a drug, he might be a drug pusher, or he's fundamentally thinking, I'm doing a good thing.
Yeah, I think he's an entrepreneur. That's a captive market.
Or maybe, you know what? Because because he's a pastor, I'm trying to give him a way out. I'm thinking maybe he cared so much and saw this person struggling, and he maybe does not know better, and he's giving this person these drugs to be able to. If the very arbiters of moral goodness are corrupted, what is the way out? Mm-hmm. Because Uganda is growing, it's for it to grow the way it wants to grow. I think they want to uh, 500 trillion GDP, I think, something
It's
in
a
50 years. Or
10x.
10x.
Yeah.
So that's 10% GDP growth year on year.
It actually has to be 16 and above.
But now with all the things that are happening, it could work. But then that's even more money to do even more spot treatments and even more cocaine. Oh my goodness.
More beauty treatments.
That's super scary. How do we get out of this?
How do we emerge from this wilderness? And will John the Baptist emerge out of the internet to lead us to, a savior of some kind? I do not know. The thing about human nature that is so endearing to me is our ability to remain resilient, to regenerate.
To remain hopeful.
And to regenerate. That is why, of course, I'm very passionate about Uganda and East Africa and Africa. I fear there is now a generation that don't think, the way that we are wired to think, which is when you wake up in the morning, your first instance is to think, okay, where are we going,
What are they wired to think now?
Well, where you're going now is basically, where do I catch a cab, a border, and it's much more functional,
Not where am I going?
Not the imagination, eh? And even when it comes to our creatives who are good and in some cases at par with the rest of the world, they are much more distracted. You don't see big themes. I know this. For example, I collect art. Okay. At least I said I don't own property, but I do own some art pieces. I like to surround myself with art, and I develop a relationship with great artists, surrealists, visual artists. I pay attention to what artists are doing. Right now, there's a painting that's hanging in my house. I wish you'd come to visit, of a girl who was murdered, called Susan Magara. You remember Susan?
I heard the story.
Yeah, bless her. I met her dad after he saw the painting I had commissioned. It's done by, the guy I collect the most is called Daniel again. Now, I visited the art collective because my cousin who was working with them had said, we have this art collective, but getting the right pricing for a piece of art is difficult. Like we put in so much work, materials cost. So I went in there and I told them, look, art grows in value when it connects to something society feels. You see what I'm saying? That if your piece of art is an expression of the times or captures the zeitgeist, it will grow in value. So a lot of the industrial art that you see is tasteless because it doesn't say anything really. You will go to a hotel, there's some picture or something, You don't look at it and say, oh, one of the artists I know is called Wamala. He has a painting in the hotel here of Akibwa, John. And you can see Akibwa's Olympic colors. When you walk in this particular hotel, like that's John Akibwa. But immediately when you see John Akibwa, you think about effort, grace, progress. You see, eh? And so even the image of Akibwa, okay, it captures something about Uganda. And this is a story about Susan. Susan was kidnapped for ransom. And the story dominated Ugandan headlines for like 3 weeks. When I arrived at that conversation with this young man, I was like, guys, all of us are talking about, the whole country is talking about this kidnapping. You know, they cut off her, fingers and said the parents, the president of Uganda, President Museveni got involved. This is a major, effort to save her, but eventually she died. I said, look, I want to commission painting. I'm going to talk you through it. First, I need you to paint Susan as her brother's friend. She's a Rotarian, would remember her. Okay? Because we have been suffering because of the personal tragedy of her family has been inflicted on all of us. So when they maim her, they do something to us as well. So you see the violence against her as a social violence. That's why we are paying attention. All families are concerned.
Everyone with a girl.
Yes. I think you have to capture that. And so the painting I have of the late Magara is a painting where she's covered with celestial rings, bright colors, and she's smiling, and she's got the Rotary sign here. It's one of my favorite paintings, since someone I never met. But it reminds me of that ability to see things differently. So through that art, you could say that we do not relive, because I could have gone a different direction and did a grotesque painting of this young lady that reflects the tragedy she suffered. But it is a point about hope and growth. We know why my blood temperature, which is doing badly these days, but why it doesn't rise as much. Even if you're dealing with global wars and displacement and refugees and all the kind of things we're dealing with today, is because we have lived through crisis and we've survived. And yes, I know you're concerned about, so what happens when, Comrade Museveni leaves, and his generation walks away into history. I feel that ability to pivot to something better is always there somewhere. And I hold the faith that something good will come out of it.
Absolutely. You're talking about the Magara story, because I obviously don't live here, and I read it. Did they ever find her killers?
People were arrested. I don't think anyone has actually been convicted. I haven't followed it as closely lately.
There's a story, man, and I really wasn't planning to take this conversation to this direction that I'm now taking it towards. There's a story about a young man, maybe 30 years of age, Sally, and who went into a nursery school and just started murdering children. And I wonder if there is a certain correlation between what happened to Susan Magara, what we're seeing with the beauty treatments, what you're seeing with the corruption and all the money, and also what we're seeing with this kind of violence that is so cruel that it almost leaves you thinking, if you're not, I'm like I told you, I'm not religious at all, but it starts making you think, is this the devil at play here?
But don't worry, our churches are full every Sunday and most evenings too.
Yeah, so when we see all these things, is this what how do you map this out to make some kind of coherent narrative? Okay. Is it back to the waste?
Yeah, it's the waste and displacement. But let me take a stab at it. So I told you, like in my other life, I want to think of myself as someone who tries to contribute positively. I did it as a writer. I've always thought of myself as a public servant, and I like to sort of be mentally in that role, even if I'm doing other stuff. As a public servant and as a thinking man, this issue that you raise fits in the category of society. I want you to remember that often when we deal with leadership, and you can see the headlines, they'll be talking about institutions. Public institutions are the parliament and the presidency, and public money and rituals. But society is its own living, breathing thing. And societies that have connected the two, okay, where the society and its culture, even its civilization, gives rise to public institutions that reflect its values. That is the thing that, remember, Africa missed, right? Because remember, we were colonized. And the institutions we have today are not institutions of our choosing. Can I pivot and say one of the things I admire about Rwanda, which I often cite, is the Agaciro, self-manifesting purpose, where you see beauty in who you are, okay? You embrace a standard of dignity, okay, that is high, and you reflect in what you do every day. I tell people, I'm a student of African social and political culture. I teach myself, okay? But if you go past negritude in West Africa, past the anti-colonial struggles, if you go down to South Africa and you look at the African National Congress and the fight against racist apartheid, the only other of those three ideas of what social progress looks like has come from Rwanda. And this is Agaciro. Agaciro, by the way, for me, is like an idea, an ideology even, okay, of that's based on dignity that comes out of the culture. And that is now, of course, since you're Rwandan and you live there, it is now part of the social, cultural, and political and economic system that Rwanda is building. And so it's not by accident that, many people will say, oh, Rwanda wants to do big things. For me, who's outside here, when I hear Paul Kagame say, okay, we want to do a Formula One racetrack, or we are constructing some arena to the best possible global standards, or we are building a new airport, or we are going for high-end tourism that is of the highest global standards, all I see are aspects of Agaciro. Now, look closely then at where, in the case of Uganda, where we are situated, where political institutions, okay, do not reflect social goals. We talked earlier about simply something like decent housing, okay? They don't reflect social values, because we are 46 tribes and many other contradictions along the way, and there's some value in that diversity. The institutions of the day simply anchor the hard state in place, okay? Allow for stability and maybe a certain level of planned public service, okay? But it is not drawing from some of the long-term cultural ideas that can confer dignity and purpose, okay? That comes from that society. And in that displacement, you have these seeds of really bad things. Some of it is, internalized trauma that we have carried on from the days of the wars and whatever. But there's a cynicism here today and cruelty that has been normalized. So you see, the reaction to scandal is, people shrug their shoulders. When members of the armed services, or anyone actually who is part of the disciplined security services, kill or maim, the culture seems to say that it takes the human beings away from that. They're just like, oh, that is just politics, eh? People have died, soldiers killed, whatever. They use terms like, security did this or security did that. There's a void there. This inability to see the human being, okay? To be present with that human being and to want to build, rules that govern that person, that, maintain or sustain their dignity and protect it. All of these things are going out of the way. But the dark vision actually is that this cynicism, cruelty is normalized. It's almost seen as a privilege now for you to want your human rights to be respected. For 10 years, I was part of Chapter 4 Uganda, which is a civil liberties organization. And we dealt with all kinds of human rights issues. And our clients are from outside the system, inside the system. It's seen as a privilege for you to actually have your rights protected. You see what's wrong with that, right?
Which is also super strange because, you were speaking about, this nation state of Uganda, which is made up of a certain level of diversity. But I remember speaking to last year when I had an interview, I sat down with Daudi Mpanga, a very well-known lawyer, and we're discussing values and value systems. Right now, we're having this conversation in Kampala. Kampala is in Buganda. Buganda or the Baganda have a way they relate to each other and the way they relate to leadership and the way leadership relates to them. Banyankole, same. Batoro, where my mother comes from, same. West Nile, where you come from. There's a way that in these, I like to call them nations, there's a way they relate with each other. And when you talk about human rights, there's very human rights within those different contexts. So the idea that a Ugandan cannot be kind, a Ugandan cannot be a human rights defender, a Ugandan cannot be disciplined, a Ugandan can choose to be an upstanding citizen should almost for me be as simple as being a Muganda. It's in you.
But remember that you should read a book written by he's a guy in Asian called Rational Ritual, about how these sort of state rituals, common rituals, create common knowledge. And common knowledge is something that you and I don't have to say. We all know. I know it because I know you know it. So, for example, if an elderly person came, our instinct is to stand
up. Yes.
But it's very rare these days. Okay? That sense of common knowledge is out the door. I agree with you. That's why my hope is resident in Ugandans, because individually and in their communities, they're very generous. People will go out of their way to do something good. But at the same time, the level of tolerance for the completely absurd, okay, and for the cruelty, especially the violence, that I think requires some reckoning. And I'll give you just maybe, again, like I said, I take a stab at it to situate it properly for you who's curious and who is making a life out of interrogating ideas and people. You know, to what extent really do state institutions, state laws reflect
The people.
the people? And when they don't, the people separate themselves and they practice something different. You know, you talked about being in Uganda. The communications regulator, I was up last night, just banned a song sung in Uganda by this guy who's encouraging people to take those pavers, and you know, this is violence in the ghetto, right? You know, it's called paver. Paver is like a brick.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
used,
yeah.
And the Communications Commission said this song will be banned because it encourages violence. Okay? Of course, I listened to the song because I wasn't paying attention. I listened to the song, and it seems like what is extracted by this artist, he sings about other things. The paver is a metaphor, you know, for hit it hard. Huh? And but he's also drawing on the violence.
That has been normalized.
That has been normalized, right? I've always wanted for political leaders to lead with social analysis first. That if you lead with social analysis, and there are successes here and there, okay? The programs you end up bringing forth are the ones that will have the trust of society and draw the best efforts of that society. That includes law enforcement. You know, law enforcement we have is still, you know, drawn from the British and things like that. But you know, the average person knows that doing criminal things is frowned upon by society. If you take that idea, and the president was trying to do something the other day with it, he said, with regard to the what looks like a mentally disturbed guy who killed the nursery kids, that take that and try it in the field. What he was referring to is our culture of, you know, someone has done something bad, the whole community comes and say, we're not going to allow this. Do you admit to it? And they punish you right there and then. Okay? That is what he meant. So ideologically saying, you know, you take it to society, let society judge, not your
Court system.
And he's got stuck because he referred to the DPP and the court system to take it to society. I'll give you a couple of scenarios which have involved me personally. So I live partly in the UAE, and when I got there, I heard from Ugandan officials about the high suicide rate amongst Ugandan males.
In
And now
UAE or in
the UAE?
Okay.
Yeah. And I visited some health facilities and come close, you know. And then in my mind, I was like, it makes sense at a certain level that if you go from Butambala or some other part, you know, of Uganda, you arrive in Kampala for the first time, go to Entebbe, go straight into a complex society like the Gulf, okay? Be separated, displaced, okay? And now, you know, I'm channeling Fanon. You can get into mental states that are unusual. That explained that, you know, someone who's trapped there, they've sold their land, they can't come back, they may be desperate, they may have been exploited, don't have papers, they're stuck in a foreign land, they choose to kill themselves. That's one scenario. I'm talking about a a real experience of, how, if you look at suicides generally in Ugandan society, one of the areas it happens the most is in the diaspora. Second, gun violence. I was actually having this conversation with now his Justice Minister, Norbert Mao. Norbert Mao we do this intellectual sparring from time to time. Our people in the north are Republican by nature. Every man is his own boss. The guy will be desperate here. He doesn't even have what to wear when you come into his space.
But it's his space.
His space, eh? That's how they are raised. So you have to speak with respect to him, regardless of his condition. They have a very, very, very high ethos when it comes to honor. When something disturbs that honor, they react with extreme violence. So if you think about it, disproportionately, the number of armed people who shoot others tend to come from the north.
And those are within the security services, or people just with guns?
Even with like private security guards or whatever, because they are represented there in large numbers. But how do these things? So you have to do something about the training of these northerners. Okay, that's what I meant by leading with social analysis, to say that if you confront some guy, his name starts with the O, and he's armed, and you insult his honor in some way, okay? You look badly at his, you talk to him badly, you may go after his wife. Their reaction often, and Mao says, if you insult their mothers, okay, you're going to be dead. And that is not something you capture in police training manuals. See what I'm saying? Eh? But it has to be factored in somewhere. That there's an honor society, okay, that has got this non-Bantu people for whom their social ethos, okay, is slightly different. In Uganda, you may insult Uganda, and he just is clever about it. He's like, oh no, but Sunny said something, and what does it matter? Okay, I still have my way. That reasoning won't happen if you confront some soldier, in the north. I could tell you stories about this because I spent some time giving Mao examples. Another social thing which came up in this thread that we are following. Do you remember a time when there was a large police investigation into child sacrifices here in Uganda?
Yes, I mean, I remember reading about, you'd find during a construction of a house,
there was a business.
Actually, I had a friend of mine, very close. She's married to a Ugandan. She's Rwandan. She's married to a Mufumbira. So what we'd call the Kinyarwanda-speaking Ugandans. And she, with a beautiful son, and she had refused to come here to visit
for fear of this.
Because the son did not have piercings or anything of the sort. And he was like, this round, cherubic, brown, light-skinned baby. Yeah. And she said, I am not going to visit my in-laws in Uganda. I will not have house help kidnap my child and murder this child because they want to earn untold wealth.
Illuminati.
But I don't know if, that's the thing with us, with the media. Sometimes they get one story and it becomes much larger than it is.
There is certainly a belief system that is constructed around, and a cultural belief system constructed around human sacrifices. And I don't want to take you back to your history in the Interlacustrian region, but let us say in contemporary terms, if you looked at the police reports about child sacrifices, okay, you can draw a beeline that separates the non-Bantu people from the Bantu people. All the child sacrifices are happening in the south
Yes.
and center of the country. It's a different kind of violence. In the north, you have suicides because of that honor society, okay? And you have got some, because of the wars and other things, you've got a certain type of violence, but it doesn't touch killing for this purpose. All of that happens south. If you're not just a criminal lawyer, but you're now in a position of responsibility, you're not going to learn, even if you watch CSI shows and your modern methods of crime detection, whatever, you're not going to learn of these things from some academy that you went to school with. You have to supply yourself with social analysis, okay, that is here. Why is the non-Bantu person more likely to resort to personal violence when they're insulted or they feel insulted, while some other person seated somewhere in a town in Uganda conspires? In Kono, for example, is a good place for all of this nasty business with sacrifices, thinks that going to a witch doctor or some other person, grabbing a child that has no blemishes, okay, and killing that child is a way to get ahead. Why are these both types of violence separated by cultural orientation? So leading with social analysis, I feel is one of those missing bits. We talked about where do you see hope for regeneration? There will come a time when, smart, young, public-spirited leaders will sit back and say, okay, let us look honestly at ourselves and at our moorings, okay? And come up with public policies that are much more tailored to how we are actually, not separate the state and the hard state from society in this way. Yeah.
Uganda is such a, it's a fascinating country. So much ambition, so much ambition. And not just ambition just for its own sake. It's also, it has an ability to actually live up to this ambition. But on the other side, right, so I'll see you writing pieces, I'll see Andrew writing pieces, I'll see about the ambitions of Uganda. When I drive around, I say that this ambition is grounded on some actual fundamentals. Much bigger population than, say, Rwanda, right? So close to 3 times. Actually more than 3 times. A ton of fresh water. Amazing people, because we always talk about extractive sectors and oil and gas, but I always say the people are the true gift of God. And you have a level of peace. There's a reason to be ambitious, because every so often when you actually want to, you pull it off. On the other side, there's just so much frustration. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example, and this is something that I saw. There's going to be an AFCON 2027. It's the Pamoja AFCON. Mm-hmm. Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. It's a big deal.
Very big.
It's huge. Now, I saw that Uganda was going to build stadia and do this and get ready to invite Africa into Uganda and get ready to receive the best of African football. And I was excited. As an observer, I say, yes, why not? This is a good thing. This is something that should be celebrated. But then there is also a ton of skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the skepticism is, especially online, but I'm sure the same in the media, there's a lot more skepticism about, oh, Uganda cannot do this.
Mm-hmm.
Uganda cannot. Where we, as someone outside looking in, I'm seeing one thing, right? I'm seeing the ability to, you're not poor. All you have to do is just get your minds right
Reduce
and
the
choose.
waste.
No. You're actually so rich that you can actually have the best of both worlds. There could be both waste and a certain level. You have runway. You have a certain level of runway that allows you to do amazing things if you truly put your minds at it. But somehow, the way I see you as an outsider looking in, and the way the insiders look at themselves,
Mm-hmm.
what does that gap tell us? Has cynicism almost become the Ugandan default mindset that we will fail?
There's an article I wrote about. There's actually a handbook, changing the mindset.
Mm.
In the interests of full disclosure, I told you I wear many hats.
Mm.
In fact, maybe what I should do is reduce the number of hats I wear
Mm.
in the coming years. But I did volunteer
Mm.
for a role in AFCON.
Okay.
So I am actually on one of the most important committees
Mm.
for AFCON, events and operations.
Okay.
I'm on the subcommittee.
That's part of the local organizing committee?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So LOC has got various committees
Mm-hmm.
that do various tasks.
Mm.
And then the heads of those committees form the main LOC, which is led by the First Lady and the Sports Minister, who are conveners.
Mm.
And the way the AFCON Pamoja is organized, of course, is that you have the LOC, which is now sort of a body corporate,
Mm-hmm.
that spends money, and then money is spent first, as something that Uganda is committed to doing to meet standards for this, whatever, and also spent alongside CAF, which is the continental football body, which has stipulated how those budgets, meet the standards of the game. So we had a dry run with Chan,
Mm-hmm.
and for August last year,
Mm.
I spent the entire month on the games. So, and they went successfully, reasonably. The one thing I appreciated, of course, and I kept telling my colleagues, is the fans. If you sit in the boardrooms, you can walk away depressed.
Mm.
Yeah.
Why?
I'll be honest about this.
Why?
Because of what it takes to organize, to move together. I'll tell you, I'm a government appointee on that subcommittee, which is made up of civil servants, and then it's made up of people from the Football Federation, and then it's made out of me, who just like other persons like me who are just public-spirited citizens who are there, okay, to make a contribution. Now, I'm just trying to get into your cynicism.
Mm.
The cynicism is actually justified.
Really?
It is justified because many times, the level of commitment is below par. The types of response, okay, to high standards is below par. And I'll tell you stories about this. But the moments when we are working together, we produce miracles. There was a moment in the Chan Games when we had a visitation. For the games, we are commingled with CAF officials. For example, all the branding there is CAF. They have inspectors of security, on health. I was in charge of health teams, etc. And one of them came and said, "Oh, by the way, you guys are working at a standard that's higher than Kenya and Tanzania. How are you managed? Like, this is great." But then when we went and asked the stewards, they hadn't been paid the whole week. How are you guys managing? And the Ugandan official said, "But even us guys have not been paid, but we shall be paid at some point." Of course, in my world, excellence means that someone who has planned well shouldn't have a steward there. And the stewards are those guys who take care of the stadium. Who has come, I don't know, from Kono, paid their own transport, doesn't have the recommended number of bottles of water, hasn't had lunch served at the right time, in the right place, okay, to maximize his time. I mean, these are aspects of planning that ought not to be rocket science, okay? They ought to be part and parcel of the package of excellence. Instead, what we see is the commitment from those unpaid people and those of us who are there, in fact, everyone, okay, trying to support a planning process that could have been done better. That's what I'm saying. From the outside in, the cynicism may be justified because there are people who are out there and they're saying, this is a game of chances, it's a hit or miss. We could get it right or we may not. However, the bottom line for me was walking in that stadium, okay, and seeing the energy and the emotional commitment of the fans who were there. And that's why I know that AFCON is going to be like a huge success because there are some aspects of Uganda, okay, that are fundamentally good, okay?
Yeah, I actually think that there are a lot of aspects of Uganda that are fundamental. In fact, they're largely fundamentally good. Now, in my previous life, also, I've worn a few hats like you. I did a bit of work around events and creating events, and one of the hardest things is not just necessarily the event; it's everything around it. And so again, now that you've informed me that you're part of the LOC, let me just ask you a very blunt question. Just when are the games? It's next year, what, summer?
Yeah.
No.
I think they actually announced the actual dates.
It's usually at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. It is, I need to just consult.
It's
I know
usually
the dates were announced the last 48 hours.
Right. That's not a lot of time. You maybe give or take 11 months if you're super lucky. Now, one of the challenges when Rwanda was trying to have some, I think we also had the Chan a few years back, and one of the challenges was that we didn't have enough stadia. So we had the ones in Kigali, those were not a problem. Then we had the ones in what we call Huye, or some people still call it Butare, it's older name. So there was a stadium that was built, but then CAF came and said, you need to at least have X amount of 4-star hotels. fortunately, we had a little bit of time. That's Butare, for those who don't know, is probably the third biggest city. It was where the big national university
Yeah,
is.
it's a
It was
university town.
it's a huge university town. So there was always a little bit of tourism anyway, and it's on the road to Burundi. So there was some hotels there, and they just needed to get up to standard. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is that there is going to be various stadiums in various
Yeah,
parts
there's
of
some concern about
so
whether or
yeah,
not you
no,
have the
and this is just
facilities.
me, just like I've known just how difficult pulling certain things are. Um, do you feel confident that the cynicism, because it goes back to the cynicism, right? So again, I'm reading this, like there's no way in hell that you're going to have a private sector, a person who owns a hotel, who do X, Y, and Z. Back home in Rwanda, because I guess of the way our system is set up, people can we can put a local organizing committee of business people, government, the Rwanda Development Board, the Ministry of Sports, and even say someone from the office of the president, okay, what's the plan? We need to build a hotel here, here. Okay, how are we going to get the money? Okay, let's also get someone from the Bank of Kigali. Let's make sure, okay, how do we, the 18% is a bit too high. Quickly, let's see how we can lower how we can de-risk this so that the interest rate is not as high, so that this person can actually build. Okay, what do we do with training? Oh my goodness, because obviously the hotels need
let's invite the
trained
tourism
staff,
training people,
right? But then we don't have enough of those. Let's go to Kenya, right? So everything kind of happens, you know. But we've almost made it easy.
Yeah, it's not part and parcel of how
it's just how we do things. From what it seems is, from here, it seems that there's still pockets of excellence that don't
align,
speak together.
Yeah, you know.
So if that does not exist, then how do you pull off miracles? Because that's what you're fundamentally trying to do.
Yes, indeed. You know, I am part of a think tank we started in 2008. And I remember for a while myself and our colleagues since tried to define what the problem is in Uganda. And we zeroed it down to, okay, there are other ways of looking at it, but the term we applied there is asymmetry. Okay? That we have fundamental asymmetries that cut across, you know, public life, you know, affect the public purse, affect planning. And I feel like in this whole conversation, when we talk about displacement and misplacement, okay, it's all about finding the right symmetry, or what Ugandans like to call alignment. But asymmetry is a disease that pervades the public sector.
What are the symptoms of the disease?
People working in silos. There is a certain territoriality amongst the government ministries, departments, and agencies.
This is my budget.
Yeah. It's my budget, it's my thing. And it's, you know, sometimes it produces positive effects in that there's competition, but there's a lot of duplication, and that's part of the waste story. There is also just broad inefficiency. And that you see it in any time you organize something or you try to solve a problem, okay? The public sector problem, you will find a massive asymmetry. Now, there are positive aspects of this, which are by design, but that is in the political realm, because stability also means that you've got multiple layers of checks and balances, okay? So when you have groups of elites at each other's throats. Okay, they ensure
they forget to go to the bush.
they ensure that the system creates a certain parity we call stability. Over time. I cannot tell you, I cannot emphasize, and especially for Ugandans who are watching that, that's how come you can build the most expensive road in the world.
I mean, I went on it. It was nice.
Yeah, at the longest time it takes to build a road in the world. Even the Romans, Roman engineers or military engineers would have done it for shorter time.
And probably cheaper.
Of course. Because though, to be fair, the Romans used slave labor and other things there, So that inefficiency is ingrained. I am happy for AFCON Pamoja because sometimes what it does, it forces, it's like a compressor. So it forces people to actually contend with one purpose and, get things done. So you've had that in Hoima City, I don't know if it's lack or but then they got a good contractor and they put up a good stadium.
Suma.
Yeah. And there are some adjustments, but it's already AFCON ready. I saw just the other day that actually I read it overnight, that a budget has been allocated for the nearby airport. As a director at the Investment Authority, I took a delegation of my fellow board members to Bulisa and Hoima, because the oil and gas sector is, where I spend a lot of my time. And many of them had not been there, so they hadn't seen the oil field, they hadn't seen the airport. And I remember telling the guys in the sector that, look, that airport should be functional, not just for the oil sector, but it should be ready because, it oversees the Congo there. You've got traders, around in the nearby communities, nearby towns. You need a functional airport. You already have a runway. And I heard back that there's some budget issues over how to pay for the control tower. It was just the usual asymmetry. But they're going to do it. Remember, Sunny, that once you have clarity of purpose, actually getting the work done is not that difficult. As far as the 5-star hotels and other things are concerned, we'll have to get very creative about what to do. Maybe the final thing with regard to AFCON Pamoja is that I know CAF sets all these standards. My own sense of what needs to happen is that people need clean, safe, accessible accommodation. Okay? And those are all regulations that you can enforce. Secondly, that the so-called standards that are required to do a successful game, we can negotiate it with CAF. I saw it with Chan that we're able to come to an understanding of what is feasible and what is practical. But at the bottom end of this is what is the service to the fans, to get people to retain the interest and the passion for the games. I think that should be the fundamental goal of the LOC. To make sure that there's another generation of football lovers who just see beyond AFCON that this is a sport, that's an African sport, it's lovely to watch. That excitement that we saw during when our teams were playing, that's something that I want to keep much closer, even as we deal with all these practical things.
On the last note on that very topic, you talk about, and I feel slightly uncomfortable taking it to this space, but that's. I like excellence.
I do too.
Mhm. I think one of the things that I always see here when I go to people's homes, excellent. When I eat Ugandan food, excellent. There's a certain standards of excellence that Ugandans can tap into, even when they choose to.
Mhm.
And it seems as if with this opportunity to have the eyes of the world, the football world. If you see what happened in Morocco and the kind of, despite, let's not talk about the final and everything that has happened around that. But then for months and during the games themselves, there was an energy there. Morocco put its best foot forward. Do you think that people will watch the finals? Because a lot of fans will not come, let's be honest. Most of us will not be able to. But when they see the facilities, when they see the reporting, when they see the pitches, when they see the accommodation, when they see the transport. Because when you think about Morocco, and how they were really able to showcase, the fan zones and the transport and the trains and the hotels, and there was so much amazing content that was created, not by the organizing committees or this, it was rather by the people who actually came there, that people will leave, the fans from around the continent will leave Uganda thinking this was excellent. And those who are at home, who are, watching the TikToks and all of this, will also think, oh, this is excellent. Or will it be African games, eh? The football was great. The food. That's what they always, when you think about how we,
Sunny.
yeah. You're confident.
I'll tell you what I'm confident about. One is, while it is good to try and rise up to the whatever places like Morocco, or even next door in Rwanda.
No. Please do not get Rwanda involved in this.
All right. No. We talked about excellence, but anyway, while it is okay to try and, if you've been to business class lounges, okay, and you travel, I'm sure you do.
Not business.
Okay.
Not yet. One day.
Yeah. Well, anyway, if you go to these airport lounges, okay, around the world, there's a certain level of there's a certain standard that permeates across them. And so you could be in Hong Kong or in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or here in Entebbe or in Kigali, the new airport maybe, and you see what are called so-called global standards. Okay, all of that stuff is okay. I don't want Ugandans to try and compete with a country where you could travel by rail anywhere, like Morocco, okay? Or, fly from, even the Kenyans, you can fly from Eldoret to Nairobi, Kisumu. What Ugandans need to do, and this is now I'll be honest with you, what I had problems with during Chad, okay, was that we didn't get the fans involved early enough, because Ugandans have things to say about their country. Remember, it's a beautiful country, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a beautiful country. I have an interest in film. I don't know if you do, but I have this interest in art and film. I'll one day tell you my experience trying to promote international films here, starting with Queen of Katwe, the Disney film that was here. But you could wake up any day, and if you wanted a picture-perfect country in the world, okay, you have snow-capped mountains, pristine mountain ranges. Of course, you've got the gorillas there. You've got large bodies of water. You could shoot an ocean scene if you want. Okay, you've got roaring what you call prairies, basically grasslands. You've got semi-arid areas. So you've got these sort of table mountains. You've got the Nile at the bottom of it. So it is a form of it's a paradise of sorts. The Garden of Eden, to quote John Garang, about that whole stretch, the Nile to Sudan. This Garden of Eden does not need any more than just, making it accessible to visitors. And within this Garden of Eden, you've got some of the most welcoming, polite people. For your footballing experience to really be good, because football really basically is arriving at a stadium, finding a seat, and being able to watch, young men compete. That's what happens in the stadium itself. Okay, but the rest of the story about the country that I would like to tell visitors, it's a very beautiful country. It is accessible. It is a place where you find polite people. If you take time and pay attention to this Garden of Eden, that is what we are going to compete on. Now, I'm of course a patriot, okay? And I always like to think, not only like to think, but I always see the best out of this country. And I think that we have more than enough to share with the world, okay, to make this a positive event.
One of the things that because you were talking about the airport in Hoima, the international airport, right? And you said you took people out into the oil fields. Let's talk about oil. Finally, after years and years and years and years, oil is being pumped out of the ground. And from Western Uganda, the oil will move to the Indian Ocean through, if I'm not mistaken, a pipeline.
One of the world's longest
heated pipelines.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I know the wording. One of the longest heated pipeline to the coast of Tanzania. Mm-hmm. Now, first of all, that's good news. That's very positive. But looking at what is happening in the world today, and when I talk about the world today, I'm talking about the Strait of Hormuz. I'm talking about the fact that 20% of crude is being literally being strangled because of the choices that Trump and Bibi Netanyahu and the mullahs in Iran, their disagreements are causing. Do you think that President Yoweri Museveni now really regrets the fact that Uganda does not have its own oil refinery? Because one of the things that we're now seeing already, I mean, in Rwanda the other day, our prices of both diesel and petrol went up almost 20% in one night.
I saw the announcement,
and that's in Rwanda, where we actually can kind of control as much as we can through subsidies. We try to keep, the government tries to keep the prices low as possible, where it's already happening. And immediately what I then saw was increases in transport costs, increase in bus fare, increasing gas price. Like, it's crazy. Do you think
And actually, the
That-
picture gets
that
much
Rwanda-
more crazy when you think about gas for cooking and fertilizer.
Yeah, no. Do you think that Museveni, looking at the price of a barrel of crude oil, do you think he regrets not insisting on having local refining capacity here in Uganda?
To the contrary, I think he would argue
Mm.
that he was right all along, because
Right, all along in what sense?
the reason why we had such massive delays in the oil projects was because he was trying to get a refinery to be part and parcel of the package.
Mm.
So it's the one thing that he fought for like hell, when oil was discovered, the initial plans, this is the area where, I'm writing a book.
Mm.
The initial plans by the Anglo-Irish company, because I saw them, was simply to track the oil to the coast.
Mm. Like,
Uh,
like crude oil.
Crude oil, yeah. It was always a crude first policy
Mm.
by the international oil companies.
Mm.
Uganda insisted on a refinery, and then it took nearly
Uganda, or is
years.
it Museveni?
Well, the way the oil sector was structured
Mm.
is that during the exploration period, government geologists, were working in a silo. And one of those silos was protected by the presidency. So oil
Mm.
was effectively,
Run through State House.
him personally. And I've met oil executives in the course of all these years who said in the negotiations, for the farm down and things like taxes, he insisted on the capital gains tax and took the oil companies to court and then won in London, remember?
Hmm.
Setting an Africa trend, actually, because oil companies have always been concerned about the gains taxes being, a sore point. Capital gains taxes, when you transfer assets such as oil fields from one ownership to the other.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 30% gains tax, which is the law here.
Mm.
And one of the companies did not want, and went to court.
Mm.
Remember that big handshake story where he was rewarding, government civil servants for doing such a good job. It was stating in principle that Uganda had triumphed by insisting that you pay your fair tax. But the refinery was the one area where he battled the most. Where deals, and I'm telling you this because I used to be consulted occasionally by the IOCs or their representatives.
What are IOCs?
International oil companies.
Mm.
And, I'll tell them, look, the important thing to understand the mindset of the president, is that he sees that resource as giving you leverage and leverage over him from the capitals where you come, So he sees oil, he sees what oil has done, to other African countries. He doesn't want that instability. Given a choice, as to whether to exploit this oil now and risk instability or leave it in the ground and just continue as normal, he will leave the oil in the ground. Uganda has one of the longest oil to market histories in the world. Oil was discovered in 2005, commercial quantities announced in 2006. 20 years later, we are now 11 weeks away at the recording of this program to first oil. And that's the official government timeline. It took this long because oil has always been part and parcel of the political project for stability first. The refinery is a huge part of that.
Obviously.
And I'll tell you, it's one of those principal parts. Of course, now it's part of the law, Unlike other countries, we have got, a law for exploration, a midstream law, which is about refinery, and then an upstream law. So in the upstream, you've got exploration. In the midstream, you've got processing and whatever. And then downstream, you have, finance and other things. Mm-hmm. So I feel that he may express some frustration. I'm sure he's going to say it soon enough. And I'm predicting for what he's going to say. He's going to say, look, I've been right all along. We insisted on the refinery, okay? Oil companies did not want it. We fought for it. It caused delays, okay? We tried to build one. That's what he did. He gave a concession to one company. It took 7 years. Nothing came out of it apart from a study. Okay. Now he has another group, even changed the model of how to finance it, put in his government, Uganda putting his own money. So we have got a deal with a UAE-based company to build a refinery alongside the crude project. So he will say he was right all along. I would say he should feel some regret, because I remember I was just a journalist at the time. But when the debate about a refinery came along, I had a good friend in the Ministry of Finance who was director for economic planning, and he was in charge of convening all the oil people together. He's called Lawrence Kiza. Brilliant public servant, excellent public servant. And he was the guy in charge of, heading the cuts. And I remember talking to Lawrence about the refinery. I said, government of Uganda is thinking about a commercial refinery, one that is viable, can pay for itself. I think that's the wrong direction. Give us a loss-making refinery that in a year's time, if you do it right, okay, you can get kerosene out of the ground, you can get certain fuels, including diesel. As you know, diesel is the biggest component of oil imports into East Africa. And then maybe get some petrol or aviation fuel later. But my calculation at the time was, if you give us a loss-making refinery now, and I remember connecting it, this is before the whole climate change thing, connecting it to building electricity capacity in the whole western rim of Uganda, and making the economic argument that your losses in subsidizing the refinery will be picked up in economic activity down the road. I mean,
that's the entire that thinking, that ecosystem thinking is 100% the reason why, for example, the government of Rwanda has spent so much money on Rwanda Air. It's a loss-making entity, and why they built that huge Kigali Convention Center, as well as the Amahoro Stadium. It's not because they will individually
They are
make
not profit
money.
centers by themselves, but they're the engines of growth.
Exactly.
And from growth, we can get tax and other things.
And people get jobs.
We lost that argument. And I think we lost it.
Why?
Partly because what the president was trying to do was balance the forces that come with large-scale international investment. I mean, I could tell you.
So there was.
I could tell you this because I was in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I could hear when Tallow, which is this Anglo-Irish company, was ready to sell its share of that was as large as a $10 billion deal. Another Italian company made the government of Uganda a good offer. It was called ENI, the large Italian company. And Heritage, which was Tallow's partner, was willing to deal with the Italians. And then it became all a bit of a melee, because Tallow officials thought the government because Heritage is the one that initially sold part of their stake to Tallow, they thought that the government of Uganda would take the better deal from the Italians, and that Tallow had what you call rights of preemption. A right of preemption is like, we are partners, but if you decide to sell, I have the right to
buy first.
To buy first. And I met a guy called Tim O'Halloran, who was the Africa manager for Tallow. I won't tell you how it was, but friends of mine told them, you go and speak to Angelo before you go to State House. And I met them at Emin Pasha Hotel. And they're like, what do you think? If we're going to State House, do you think our right of preemption will be preserved, or will Museveni take it away? I said, no. First, you get this wrong. He's listening to technocrats. And at this stage of our oil journey, okay, no risks like that will be taken, okay? It's important for you to understand that he's trying to run a tight ship. So your right for preemption, that is not a problem at all. You can go on. Be assured that you can, all of this stuff won't happen. He'll protect the technical people who are giving him the right advice. However, and this is the caveat, bullying and how oil companies come with the power from their government. I said, however, attempts to bully him, the oil remain on the ground. Like he will not respond positively to pressure, because pressure is exactly what he's trying to avoid. You see? And it went like they went, as you know the story now, they preempted the sale, okay? Eventually acquired Heritage's rights. The actual story was very painful because Uganda had a relationship with Heritage, which was older. But that happened. Then when it came now to Tallow's bringing in new partners, the French and the Chinese came in as a counterbalance, because that is really the politics of the thing. And in between all of that that's going on, Museveni is fighting in principle, okay,
to have a local refining capacity.
And then he takes that principle eventually to the mineral sector. Remember, he then put a ban
on the export of
any raw minerals. It's the same principle. He just wanted to domesticate it, but maybe because he's a politician he sees range, time is not a factor for him, not in the way that you and I see it, okay? He was able to say, okay,
I'll lose this war.
I'll
lose this battle to win the war.
But win the war. Yeah, that's the story of the refinery. I think the refinery eventually will arrive. I have just written that, in 2011, 2012, government actually commissioned a report called the Foster-Wheeler Report. And the Foster-Wheeler Report is the one that says a refinery situated where the product is, okay, is a much better option than the pipeline even.
I guess here's what you say makes 100% makes sense 100%. 100% we need, we can't eat crude oil. We need to be able to have gasoline in our cars. We need stuff in our tractors. I guess it goes back to the question of, you can have wishes all day long. Your ability to implement them at speed and at cost is the fundamental. It's the real challenge.
Yeah, and
so the question then becomes: do you not worry that by the time everything comes together, a perfect scenario, perfect storm, money's found, contractors build roads, electricity, by that time all of this happens, what we assume the world is going to remain the way it is.
That it changes every day.
The calculations we have at this moment are not the same that will exist 20 years from now. The way we use electricity and where we get our power from might fundamentally change. Do you not worry that Uganda might have already missed that refining train, the refinery train, that by the time everything comes together 10, 15 years from now?
I'm not worried about that.
Yeah?
Yeah. Even if I'm not part of the planning process, I did try to join the board of the National Oil Company at some point, because this is an area I'm passionate about. But if I was part of the planning process in a formal role, yes, I would build that refinery in 18 months. And I'll build a refinery that, because at
18 months?
Yeah.
Can it be done?
Of course.
Okay.
It's just an engineering problem. Okay,
it's a material problem.
Yeah, it's an engineering problem. You can build it in less time. Yeah. If you put your mind to it, it can be done. But why I'm not worried is that the problem that the Ugandan refinery is going to solve is now even bigger than when we first designed it. Okay? You want a refinery, essentially, not to make money, but to solve problems. And the problems are here. Affordable transport, cheaper cooking gas, which solves our problem, cutting down trees. Okay? Kerosene, which has got multiple uses at the local level. Okay? And diesel, okay, which is the oil that we need the most, which powers the economy. Now, by all estimations, even if you had whether you have a refinery today in 18 months, 48 months, or in 52 months, okay, that refinery is still needed. And across Africa, we have far less refineries than we need. And by the way, at the core of it, the principle, which is the domestication of that capacity, okay, it grants us the kind of autonomy that we need. Of course, you've seen the situation forced by the situation in the Middle East, okay, where you've got shortages you didn't anticipate. But that disruption, most countries are going to move away from it. They're going to try to be self-sufficient. So a refinery is always going to be something that we need. And that is why I'm not too worried about it. Yeah.
Talking about transport and the price of energy and the price of goods and services, I think the last time there was a major shock, an oil shock, was about 2011. And if I'm not mistaken, we saw in Uganda food prices going up by close to 40%.
Yeah.
Now, in your writings, you've connected the oil shocks, food inflation, the walk to work, protests by Kizza Besigye, and you made an argument that these protests would have never actually, because there was always maybe the anger, but there was no, the spark just wasn't there, and the increased prices of petroleum products was the spark.
Yeah, it tracked on inflation.
Yes. Now, if this continues, because we make assumptions that, you know what, it will never get as bad as it will be, it will today. What, maybe you know this better than I do. What's the price of a liter of petrol now here in Kampala, average?
It's about 5,400.
5,400.
In the cheapest place.
And what was it? What did it used to be? Maybe
there's been
2
a
months ago?
slight increase in palm prices by about 150 to 250,
Okay.
depending on where you go.
Okay. And do you think that it will continue to go up?
No. I mean, there may be a slight increase.
Ah.
What is changed
Mm.
is that Uganda abandoned the open market system.
Mm.
So now all petroleum products are imported by the National Oil Company,
Mm.
which gives the Minister of Energy some oversight over that ecosystem.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
It's something that I think Rwanda has been able to do for the last
yeah. So they
two
are
or
not
three-
setting
2
prices.
decades.
It is still a market-based system,
But there's a
but they can see
Mm.
that we have product.
Mm.
So why are you pricing yours higher?
Mm.
And there are other tools in which you can pressure, OMCs, which is oil marketing companies, to behave.
Mm.
That's the difference. When I first got involved with funny oil cartels as a journalist, because they are there.
Yes.
The oil marketing companies are very organized in exploiting crisis. I'll tell you that. What was different was that the cartels didn't have a regulator. They relied on Uganda's open system, okay? And they would exploit an international crisis to increase the price, and there was no one to rein them in. Yeah, this is that, but that's the situation has now changed fundamentally. It could be, in a best case scenario, where if you have refining capacity in place and you're able to get the crude, not from imported crude, but from here, that these oil marketing companies will have even less reason to price their products so highly. Yeah.
So you don't see, you're not right now seeing any major spikes in cost of food.
My worry is the worry that all landlocked governments have, which is that unless you're able to resupply yourself, because right now we have some fuel cover until the 1st or 2nd week of May, and then we need to resupply. If the people who are in charge are working as hard as possible, then they will have found secondary sources of oil, which are not reliant on the situation in the Middle East, but the source of inflation that can be imported from sourcing expensively is that you have to pass on the price. If you're getting your oil, say, from Russia, okay, instead of Bahrain, and insurance costs have gone up, which is for all maritime insurance has gone up because of this crisis. Those costs now have to be factored in. Number of days it would take a ship, okay, to come around and dock in Mombasa and then fill your stores. That is also a cost for the longer transportation route that has to be factored in. So you've got the insurance premiums going up, you've got the actual cost of transportation going up, and then you've got the price of the product, as you've seen. It's only today that the price has dropped by 14 points. The price of crude, Brent, but it could still be high next week. So the cost of the product is high, cost of transporting is high, cost of insuring it is high. Even if you found other sources that are not impacted by this war, there are still cost elements. And what other governments are doing is they're giving up their taxes on the fuel to cause some relief. And I'm not going to be as confident because I'm not in charge, but I'm going to be as confident as possible, seeing what I know about this sector, that they will try and do what it takes to keep, first, the supply consistent, and secondly, that the price should not go too high.
I guess it goes back to what you're talking about, which is about political stability and how the leadership sees it. And so he's probably thinking, I saw what happened last time.
Of course.
I will not, will not be having people destroying my
Inflation,
Kampala.
you know, me and my buddies used to calculate crime based on inflation.
Yeah.
Because anytime you've got inflation growing by a factor of 2, we saw a spike in crime. And then we realized it's quite simple. When it's difficult for you to go, you know, you used to go from Chaliwajala to town at a cost of, say, 500. The cost doubles. Okay? So you're like, okay, now I may have to walk. Okay? Or I go less times. But because it's a fixed cost, you have to give up expenditure elsewhere to maintain that cost. Now, when those fixed costs combine, such as you've got rent and school fees, then people are really desperate. And I remember doing the analysis of the crime reports, and I realized that a lot of the so-called spike in crime in 2011-12 were just home invasions, people stealing disposable goods. So phones, laptops. So the crime crate is a market of its own, but it's a response, especially in the inner cities, to that urban fragility to inflation. What relieved us, as I have written before, is that, you know, during 2011, we had a double crisis. You had got the effect of the global economic crisis that hit us here with, you know, the cost of petroleum and other products going high. So, but alongside that inflation came a poor harvest that year.
So double whammy.
Double whammy, yeah. But when the harvest came in and food became cheaper, some of the tension subsided, you know. So these days, when you're looking at what could potentially be a crisis, you look at food, the cost of food, the availability of food, okay, and the cost of that food. You remember during COVID, one of the things that was exempt was food markets and the trucks
That brought in food.
that brought food to the city. So at a very rudimentary level, stability is, again, you can track it on inflation, but track it on food inflation first. And this other inflation that is imported, which again, in our case is really diesel inflation, okay, comes in as something that you could potentially manage.
You know, you've spoken quite a bit about the way Museveni thinks about energy, the way Museveni thinks about inflation and power and how he wields it. Have you ever met him? Have you ever met the man?
Yeah, we've, you know, until I gave up going to State House press conferences because he never keeps time. And I actually told my editors I didn't want to go because, you know, you could go there and you're trapped for hours. At the last time we met, I think he had been visited by Robert Zolik. He used to be Secretary for Agriculture, then became head of the World Bank. A very, very, very aggressive American patriot and politician who, when he became head of the World Bank, first of all, I remember when he was head of the Secretary for Agriculture, if I'm not mistaken, the president can give his own account of this, but he tried to force Uganda's hand over GMOs because Europe and America were fighting a battle over, you know, these technologies, food technologies. Europeans wanted to remain organic. The Americans were making a lot of their money from, you know, soybean, corn, and canola, which are all grown as you know, with genetically modified technologies. It is a huge part of the Republican constituency where farmers, you know, and so, you know, I think Zolik and others wanted to make the argument that if the Europeans opposed food technologies, it would threaten Africa's food
Food
security.
security.
Yeah, but it was just he was a bully. Yeah, now I can tell you he's a bully. Anyway, I remember because I was around listening to these things, and then Zolik came to Uganda, and I was at a press conference at which Museveni called me out by name because I was there with all these, sheepish ministers and others in the audience. And because I knew about Zolik and his very abrasive style, and I knew also that the president had been going away. Because I was like I told you earlier, I was always opposed to aid, and he had been moving away from that argument, and he has always been about strategic autonomy and stuff. Anyway, here he is with Zolik, and I was kind of taken aback. So I put up my hand and I told him, Mr. President, you have always talked about reducing dependency on donors and aid, and yet here you are with the World Bank president about to announce, something along, going around this path which you oppose. And he said, you, Mr. Izama, the problem, we have is your people don't pay taxes. and from that time, I figured out that, the proportion of foreign aid to GDP will go down in relationship to our ability to raise money through taxes here. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I think in his mind, total independence is also about, economic autonomy, at least a balance of it. That's his world. He talks a lot about middle income, I think these are the tributaries of that thought. I disagree with him with middle income, but as far as the term is concerned, I know we're about to conclude this, but whenever I see countries talking about middle income status, it's okay. As a planning tool, it makes sense. But it shouldn't be the holy grail of achievement for a country. For the simple reason that, income doesn't tell the story of the people. It's just numbers, You have to look beneath the hood and ask yourself, what is the social condition under which people are? You can have, and we will attain middle income with oil easily, but the problems you and I have been discussing here throughout this program will remain.
Yeah.
So I kind of resisted for a while. Every time I had middle income, I was like, guys, let's not talk about GDP. Let's talk about middle income. Connect that to the lived experiences of people. Connect that to how you solve major public problems, such as mass transportation or cheap electricity, cheap cooking fuels, a better education system. You know what I'm saying, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that middle income cannot just be, something that we elevate to a national goal. I'd rather not reach middle income, but be able to see these problems being solved.
So it kind of, this is going to be the last question. And this is a question that I'll ask every single Ugandan that I speak to. So far, when I ask Ugandan journalists this question, I get different answers, which is...
Oh, you said,
yes.
When's the last time I met the president?
Yes, and by the way...
But I wanted to correct
yes.
that. So I saw him when I was a journalist asking that question.
Did you get a chance to meet him mano a mano, face to face?
No. But he was solving a disagreement that affected our board of the investment authority. After I left journalism, he appointed me as a member of the board of the Uganda Investment Authority at the recommendation of the minister. And so I was a public servant for 3 and something years. And at one of those things, we went to State House at his invitation, but we did not talk.
Was he on time this time?
Yes, he was.
So it was just for journalists, but please continue.
Yeah, he was on time, but you know he'll be the first to admit that you know timekeeping is not his strong point.
African time.
Mhm.
So last question. I asked this question to Raymond Mujuni, and you know, he gave one answer. Asked the same question to Charles Onyangobo, he gave another answer. And the question was, what does a post Museveni Uganda look like? Raymond Mujuni thinks that we're already trying to see what a post Uganda, post Museveni Uganda looks like with the different moves.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking that's probably around the first son and
Mhm.
what we're seeing there. Now, when I asked that question to Charles Onyangobo, his was a bit darker. His prediction was that Uganda would fall into little fiefdoms at war with themselves.
Mhm.
I guess pretty much almost like a tropical Somalia, with little clans at war with each other.
Mhm.
What do you think a post Museveni Uganda looks like?
So
Does
the-
it look more like Raymond's, which is a bit hopeful and bright, or a bit darker like Charles's, where you know everything falls apart?
Well, let me start with my relationship with those two.
Mm.
First, you know, Charles, as you know, is a pioneer journalist and was one of my editors at the Monitor before he left for Kenya. He was one of our editors when I joined the group. And Raymond is a fellow of the Leo Africa Institute, which is the leadership training institute, where I was involved, still am. He was a first class, I think class of 2017, but I'd known him before. He had gone to the Nation Media Lab, and then he did other things, you know, was a journalist with URN, always promising, always progressive. But as a Leo Africa Young and Emerging Leaders Fellow, I've had more time to spend with him. And you're right, part of this is a generational thing, but they're both journalists, you know. And Charles has got pretty good sources. But my sense is also that, you know, with the, you know, burden of history, you know, being exiled, coming back, looking at all of these things, he's an Afro optimist, but he also experienced some of the dark days when Uganda was not viable, it was broken. And it's easy to think that those days can come back. And myself, I've said Uganda is not too big to fail, no country is. Okay? Then with regard to Mr. Mujuni's viewpoints, yeah, I would pay attention to them because first, he talks to other young people. He lives that reality. Earlier, we were talking about pockets of elites. He definitely is either one of the elites or
He might be the pocket.
he might be the pocket of the elite. I respect both viewpoints. But as a journalist and as an analyst, I have to build into that question what you call first principles. And I'll paint you the optimistic scenario. Should I start? Who should I start with? Pessimistic or optimistic? How do you like your poison?
Give me the good news first.
Okay. The good news is that the social momentum we're talking about, in its disorganized, distended, fluid movement, okay, is capable of sustaining itself. So you look at the political realm, for example. You know, I voted against the return of parties for the reasons that the parties have now demonstrated, why we should never have, allowed the experiment to come back. But organizationally, if you look at the last election, for example, set peace campaigns, all of that, the sheer number of that enterprise is one of those things that will carry on. So the NRM, for example, the ruling party, is a huge mass movement. It's also a vote-getting machine. Did you know, it's probably more now, but I remember speaking to Sam Rakojo, who was the secretary of the Electoral Commission. The total number, and I keep coming back to this, the total number of electable positions on the electoral roll, from down to LC1 to the top and all special groups, is nearly 1.7 million people.
Jesus.
Now,
that's a lot of leaders.
Yes, but it's also a system that sustains itself, So when you look at the top-heavy public spending and all of what we talked about, waste, a lot of that waste is the cost of the peace. It keeps a lot of people engaged in the political enterprise. Take it away, they're in a crisis. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to sustain it. 1.7 people, that is 3 or 4 times the size of the civil service, including the military, every other.
That's literally more than 10% of Rwanda's population.
Now you can imagine. So these election cycles, as dirty and inefficient as they are the cost of the peace. Now, if you look at a situation where Museveni is no longer there, okay? So my point is, I don't see him as a reason for this enterprise continuing. I think there may be issues with the leadership of the party or whatever, but the political culture is settling down to this inflationary election mode. Okay? So there we are. So that is, if you'd like, some positive news. It's not the best news, okay? Then at the core of Uganda's problems has always been a clash between the civilian elite and the military elite. And over the last 40 years, there's been a middle ground where the head of the army, who's the founder of the army, is also an elected civilian leader. So Museveni wears both hats. So the center of gravity operates in such a way that Museveni protects civilians from soldiers.
But also protects the soldiers from the civilians.
That's the way. That's the center of gravity. Now, assuming that there is some kind of confusion as to who is going to take over, if you sustain a personality at that core who is willing to be elected, or someone who is elected but has the confidence of the military, okay, you can still maintain that center of gravity within the state. I don't think it's too difficult to do if you don't have too much meddlesomeness, okay? It's a system that is capable of inherently of stability. Now, the worst case scenario is, I told you I'm writing a book. The book has changed titles only twice. The initial title of that book, which is a book about oil, was The Road to Mexico. That's Charles Oboe's view. Now, Mexico has got the hard state. Elections every 5 years. Then civil war level violence on the peripheries of that state, run by armed gangs, family, fiefdoms, all of them armed drug groups, But their system is a chaotic stability, okay, that is based upon the understanding that at the core of it, the political elite will sustain a state at the center. Now, we could go in a direction where there is more violence at the edges, political violence particularly. A lot of the problems we are seeing, massive displacements from land grabbing, etc., creating. And already you see some fiefdoms emerging, right? In the NRM family, you've got regional leaders now that are emerging as kingpins in there.
Really?
Yeah.
Like who?
Well, you've got the Speaker of the House is seen as a big leader in the East. Actually, you just follow the Thanksgiving calendar. Every time someone says we have a Thanksgiving, big political event, there's some, regional leader that is consolidating,
So who are the leaders? You've opened this up. So you have the Speaker of the
in the
House?
East, I can see there are a couple of people. You've got the Right Honorable Rebecca Kadaga in Busoga. She has always run sort of a political family there where she has farm control. Then you've got in Bukedia and parts of the East, you've got the Right Honorable Anita Among. Further on, you've got the current Vice President, who's also in the East, and until recently you had Honorable Mike Mukula and others. So there's a cluster. In the North, you've got some military families who are there, and now you've got emerging is our friend Honorable Mao, who you've had mentioned close to the speakership race, but you've got Justice Owindolo now retired, and others, but they see themselves also as a political family with roots all down to the electoral machine. So they deliver
votes.
In Bunyoro, something similar. There was an issue of the king in the Rwenzururu area, which was sorted out. It's a very violent episode in Kasese. And then you've got in Uganda here, where you've got,
Well, you have the king.
You've got the king, but the king kind of oversees, if you'd like, is the center here. But, there's an enterprise of organized power around him. Now, what is different between us and Mexicans is armed violence. A lot of the physical violence involving arms is criminal right now in nature, okay, after the end of the wars. If that were to become more generalized political violence, and some of these networks have access to arms, then we can go towards Charles Obo's vision, okay? But I don't see that happening. I see the civilian military architecture, essentially, especially 40 years of Museveni, has been that violence is the province
of the state.
And he guards it very jealously, and to the extent that that remains in the service of a political agenda, I think you can guarantee stability. Now, there are other unpredictable scenarios which will not come from the way this thing is organized, but could come from the externalities we saw in 2011, where you've got imported crisis, okay, that just finds the system is not strong enough and causes problems. You know what happened? My story with the Arab Spring, right? Towards the 2011 election, I was asked by my editors, Charles Obo was not there, but Wafula Ogutu and David Ouma Balikowa, who came to me and said, they've met me at the airport, like, Angelo, have you seen, there's this Mchaka groups being trained, election guard forces and things like that. They're like, the situation is not looking very good, okay? You just look at the sheer number of, pass outs of young people who are given military training and told they're going to be an election protection force. Their concern was the level playing ground for political activity. But, I was thrown a challenge, so I went back home, I thought about it, and I'd come to the conclusion that where you've got entrenched political systems, like, you can't undo them. Take the situation in Venezuela, for example, okay? Where the system is entrenched. Then the only times when you have a change is via like massive crisis. And where it's an electoral system, then you have got people power movements. And it just led me down this road where I was like, oh, by the way, there's an interesting timeline, because in 1986, just months before the NRM took power here, a government in the Philippines fell. Ferdinand Marcos had been president a long time, and it entrenched the system there. But a series of political mistakes and bad economics and bad geopolitics caused a street movement called the People Power Movement, okay, to uproot that government. So Ferdinand Marcos and his wife, lost power, and they were in exile, where he died. Now his son is in charge, though. However,
this is interesting.
Yeah, however, so I used the word people power in the headline, and promptly got arrested for it. The story actually is much more complicated. But anyway, so you can imagine, I did the analysis. I explained to my editors where it was coming from, okay? But the choice of headline was not mine, and you accept what your editors do. I saw the headline, I knew I was in trouble actually the night before. But then, of course, brought forward and interrogated. The guy who interrogated me, I was in school with him, Charles Kataratambi, is now deceased. But I tried to explain that this is just analysis. So anyway, months later, because I was given bail and I went to Stanford, but months later, the same scenario about entrenched governments being uprooted by the street happened first in Tunisia, then in Egypt. Anyway, the case was eventually dismissed because I remember.
Are you still friends with him?
Who?
Oh, he passed away. I'm sorry.
Charles. Yeah, Charles died. Yeah, Charles was a sport. Would come.
It's a sport.
Yeah, he was doing his job. He was a police officer, but he explained clearly what the red lines were and what the kind of trouble we're in. It was prosecutable offense. You go to court. But that is my story with people power. I put it in my head. My editors put it in a headline. I put it in an analysis. But because what I was analyzing here eventually just sort of took a political life of its own, the case was, so I don't have a case to answer.
Amen to that. Now, you've showed two scenarios. Look into your crystal ball. Which one is more likely?
I think I am leaning on the side of Raymond's scenario. Yeah, and I'll tell you why. So I gave you this situation with the electoral machine sort of just needing to continue. However, even if you have a situation, involving disagreements at the top, okay? Stability will have to be on the legal architecture upon which the state stands. But generationally, who are the largest number of people? They are a generation that has no war, They have been dealing with the challenges of life with soldiers in the barracks. They form the majority, okay? When I go out on the street, I see sometimes a lot of anger about economic conditions, the hassle that we are in, okay? But I do not see embedded in there. Of course, there are some ethnic and racial issues, you see, social issues, okay? I don't see there embedded an organized appetite for chaos. Yes, and I may be wrong, and I have been wrong before. But this is the optimistic side of me saying that I see this to use the NRM terminology, this bus, okay, kind of just keeping momentum, okay, and the real challenge for the next generation of leaders is how to retrofit this system such that it is much more kind, much more I would say, much more compassionate.
Mm.
So we can eliminate some of those things we've talked about, the cynicism, the cruelty, the waste, lack of organization, all those things.
You know, I always like to end my interviews with something positive, and the one with Charles, I wasn't able to, but at least here you've left me feeling a bit more hopeful. Although it does seem like it's not hope for it's not hope on its own sake. There's still a political calculation. It's not that all of a sudden, 15 years from now,
No,
you know, it's going to be full of angels. And no, it's.
I mean, you and I are
it's
journalists, so I mean, I can only provide analysis.
Yes,
and
no. What I was,
I'll be honest about it.
No, what I was saying was that I like to end things on a positive note to kind of make people feel that, you know what, we shouldn't just jump off the building. There is something to fight for. There's a nation to fight for. And there's a Uganda for us who are on the sidelines, there's a Uganda to cheer for and say, hey, keep moving forward. We need you to do well. And I think you've given us a good sense of what the challenges are. And what I think is more interesting for me is that a lot of these challenges are universal. You'll find those very same challenges, whether they're generationally in Kenya, Rwanda as well. I'll not talk about Burundi, but Tanzania. And I think your analysis allows for people who think within these silos, so a Rwandan who's just thinking this is only a Rwandan issue, to understand that those challenges around what it means to be a young person, what it means to be successful, what it means to be human, what it means to be a good leader, and what leadership looks like. That some of those questions and some of those answers can be found not just where you live, but in neighboring countries. And Angelo, I just want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a long conversation, but I never promised you a short one. It's in the name, literally in the name.
Oh, I see. You know, you got me there. It's the long.
The long form.
Got it. You know, I assumed, as primarily someone who writes, that when you said long form, it's just like the number of words increase. But you know, long form for us is like 1,800 words to 2,500 words. But of course, this is, you know,
it's a long form kind of conversation. And I thank you so much for your time. I understand that you're super busy, and I don't take this for granted. And I'm sure the viewers and listeners don't take your time for granted either. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Pleasure's all mine, and thank you for keeping these conversations going. As I said, I have just one request, which is that, you know...
Let's hear it.
Yeah. I really, I feel, I mean, we talk these days about integrating the continent, integrating the region. And during our time together, we talked about leading with social analysis. So Africa doesn't speak to itself enough. So we need much longer conversations, but between Africans. And I like the fact that you know, podcast is based in Rwanda, you're now here. Hopefully that means that you're continuing this journey to other African countries. And through your podcast, maybe we can get reintroduced to each other more. That's my
absolutely.
request.
Absolutely. And listen, I'm here in Kampala. I'll be here shooting a series over 10 days. And if everything goes as planned, I'll be coming here almost quarterly. Because I do think that, you know, before I go to other countries, it makes sense that we first speak to each other. We've been brothers in blood, literally in blood, and we've intermarried. But sometimes I still feel that we don't see each other the way that we should. And anything that I can do to share, to play that role in sharing, I will play. And then from here, then God knows where I'll end up.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.